I'm Danielle Upton and I hunt ghosts. Not the kind that haunt old Victorian houses or rattle chains in the attic, but the kind that hide in messy spreadsheets, offshore accounts, and double-entry ledgers. I'm a forensic accountant. I spent my whole career learning how to spot the tell, that one tiny jagged pixel in a big, beautiful picture that proves the whole thing is a total sham. But I missed the biggest tell of my life. Why? Because it was sitting right across from me at the dinner table for nearly 3 decades, eating pot roast and talking about family values. Before we dive into the audit of my life, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a red flag. The room was stone cold. Not the kind of silence where people are just waiting for the next word, but the kind where you can hear the ice cubes melting in 60 different glasses. My father, Richard Big Rick Upton, was standing at the head of the table at the Whitfield. He had his chest puffed out like he'd just won a heavyweight title. He'd just finished his toast at my own engagement party. "To my daughter," he'd said, his voice booming with that fake, practiced warmth, "who finally found a man desperate enough to take her off my hands." He laughed. It was a loud, barking sound that expected an echo. But there was no echo. Just 60 people staring at him like he'd just kicked a puppy in the middle of a cathedral. My fiancé, Nathan, had his hand on the table and I could see his knuckles turning white. He started to stand up. I felt the heat coming off him, that protective, don't touch my girl energy. But I reached out and gripped his arm. I held him firm. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just looked at my father, the man who spent 29 years telling me I was a charity case while he was secretly robbing his best friend blind. "Sit down, Dad," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was just final. "Before I tell you how I burned his whole world to the ground right there next to the dessert table, I need you to understand how we got here. This isn't just a story about a bad toast. It's a story about a girl who finally stopped swimming in the poison her father called love. My dad built Upton and Marsh Construction from the dirt up. He always told the same story, one rusty Ford F-150, a toolbox, and a dream. By the time I was 10, he was the king of the county. He was the guy who bought the rounds at the bar, the guy who chaired the church fundraisers, the guy who always had a guy for everything. In our town, if you wanted a bridge built or a school renovated, you went through Big Rick. But at home, the vibe was different. My dad didn't use his hands to hurt you. He didn't have to. He used his words like a scalpel. He knew exactly where the soft spots were. I remember when I was 9, 4th grade. I came home with a report card, straight A's and a teacher's note saying I was a joy to have in class. I was so stoked. I put it on the kitchen counter like I was presenting evidence in my own defense. He barely looked up from his paper. "Good grades don't mean you're smart, Danielle," he said, his voice totally flat. "Teachers hand those out when they feel sorry for a kid. Don't get a big head. You're a C student in an A student's body." My mom, Linda, was standing right there. She was always standing right there. She would just keep scrubbing the same plate, eyes down, acting like she didn't hear the air being sucked out of the room. That was the Upton family way. He would cut, she would watch, and I would bleed out quietly in the corner. But the real mind game was that he wasn't a monster every single second. That's how they get you. When I was 12, he spent a whole Saturday teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway. And when I finally made it to the end of the street without falling, he said, "That's my girl." I held on to those 4 words for years. I tucked them away in my heart like a secret treasure, using them to cancel out the 100 times he called me a disappointment. It wasn't until way later that I realized he'd only said it because the Marshes, his business partners, were over for dinner. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was a prop. I was part of the great American family man brand he was selling to the town. Pattern didn't change as I got older. Just got more sophisticated. When I graduated from college with a degree in accounting and a minor in criminal justice, I'd worked 2 jobs to keep my GPA perfect. My hands were shaking when I walked across that stage. My father wore his best suit. At the dinner afterward, at a steakhouse I couldn't afford which he chose, he spent 45 minutes telling my friends about his company's latest municipal contract. When the check came, he said loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "Well, Danielle, let's hope that diploma is worth more than the paper it's printed on. You're gonna need it if you want to keep a job." Everyone laughed. 'Cause that's what you do when Rick Upton makes a joke. You laugh or you get left out in the cold. I landed my first real position at a big-time forensic firm. I called home excited. My mother said, "Congratulations." My father got on the line and said, "Let's hope you don't bankrupt them." I laughed it off. I said, "Thanks, Dad." Then I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. But you know what's messed up? I thought that was normal. When cruelty is the water you swim in, you don't know you're drowning. You just think that's how the current moves. It wasn't until Nathan that someone finally held up a mirror. Nathan Cole. He's a civil rights attorney. We met at a joint conference in Baltimore. He wasn't flashy. He didn't command a room with a loud voice. Nathan was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, every word landed exactly where it was supposed to. On our third date, I told a funny story about how my father made a speech at my cousin's wedding where he joked that I was next on the clearance rack if anyone would have me. Nathan didn't laugh. He set his fork down and looked me straight in the eyes. "Danielle," he said, "that's not a funny story. That's emotional abuse. You know that, right?" Felt like someone had just shattered a window in a room I'd been trapped in for years. I didn't want to believe him at first. I defended my dad. I made excuses. Oh, he's just old school. He's just a jokester. But the seed was planted. Once you see the cracks in the foundation, you can't unsee them. When Nathan finally met my parents, my father tried to run his usual play. He turned the living room into an interrogation. Where did Nathan go to school? What was his salary? Did his family have old money? Nathan answered everything calmly. No ego, no posturing. Then my father leaned back and said, "I hope you're patient, son. My daughter is the kind who needs to be led." The room went quiet. My mother looked at her hands. I opened my mouth to say something, but Nathan beat me to it. "With all due respect, sir," Nathan said, "Danielle is the most capable person I've ever met. She doesn't need to be led. She needs to be partnered with." My father didn't say a word. He just stared at Nathan for a long 3 seconds. I saw the micro shift in his jaw. Nathan wasn't afraid of him. And that was the beginning of the end. Because my father's entire system depended on everyone in the room being just a little bit afraid. Nathan simply wasn't. Flash forward to last October. I'm working late at the firm doing a deep dive audit for a client. I was tracing a chain of payments through a limited liability company registered in Delaware, the usual shell game. I kept pulling the thread. The LLC was linked to a holding company. The holding company shared a registered agent with another entity. And that entity, buried 3 layers deep behind enough paperwork to make your head spin, connected back to a name I knew by heart, Upton and Marsh Construction LLC. My coffee went cold. The office was empty. The cleaning crew was vacuuming down the hall. My father wasn't just a jerk. He was a thief. He'd been skimming off the top of the company's joint accounts for 15 years. He wasn't just taking a little extra for business expenses. He was bleeding his partner, Gerald Marsh, dry. Gerald, the man who had been his best friend since high school. I saved the files, closed the laptop, and drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes with the engine off. Then I went inside, opened a new folder on my personal laptop, and named it Project Atlas. For 3 months, I lived a double life. I'd go to Sunday dinners, eat my mom's pot roast, and listen to my dad talk about integrity while I had 300 pages of his embezzlement records encrypted on a thumb drive in my purse. Nathan was the only one who knew. He'd hold me while I sat in a cold fury staring at the screen. When are you going to tell him? He asked. Not yet, I said. I want to see him play his hand first. Nathan proposed on a Sunday morning. No big show, just us and a cup of coffee. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We wanted something small for the engagement party. Maybe 20 people in a backyard. Simple. My father had other plans. He called 2 days later. I'm handling the party, Danielle. I've already booked the Whitfield. Valet parking, marble floors, the whole 9 yards. Dad, we don't need all that, I told him. He laughed. My daughter's engagement and you want hot dogs in the yard? I'm paying for it. Let me do this. I looked at Nathan. He shook his head slowly. Then my mother called, her voice having that practiced softness she used when she wanted me to fold. Just let him have this, Danielle. He's your father. He's trying to do something nice. So I folded. Like I always did. Within a week, the guest list ballooned to 60. It wasn't my engagement party. It was his stage. His country club friends, his golf buddies, his business contacts. I was just a prop in the Richard Upton show. The night before the party, Nathan and I were lying in bed. This is your party, he said quietly. Not his. You can still change the plan. If I fight him now, he'll make the next 6 months a nightmare, I said. You don't know him when he's angry, Nathan. Let's just get through the night. Okay, Nathan said. But I need you to hear something. I'm not marrying your father. I'm marrying you. And at some point, you're going to have to decide where the line is. I lay there in the dark, thinking about a story my mother told me once. She'd pushed back against my father early in their marriage. He responded by canceling her credit cards. Permanently. She had to ask him for grocery money for 8 months until he decided she'd learned her lesson. She told me that story while smiling like it was a funny anecdote. That was the price of speaking up in the Upton house. You lost your agency. You lost your voice. I looked at the ceiling and realized, if I don't draw the line now, I will become her. Saturday evening, 6:30 p.m. The Whitfield looked like a magazine spread. Candles, white orchids, a string quartet. My father was already working the room, champagne in hand. There she is, he shouted when we walked in. There's my beautiful girl. He hugged me, holding it for 3 full seconds while the cameras flashed. His cologne was sharp and expensive. My body went rigid. My father never called me beautiful. Not once. But here, in front of Gerald Marsh and the rest of the high rollers, I was his beautiful girl. I hugged him back because what else do you do in a room full of witnesses? Dinner was served at 7:15. He'd arranged the seating so he was at the head of table 1, with Gerald and Patricia Marsh to his right, my mother to his left, and Nathan and me across from them, like we were on trial. Between the salad and the entree, he started telling stories. The greatest hits of Danielle's failures. How I failed my driving test. How I almost burned the kitchen down making eggs. How my first boyfriend ran for the hills after 4 months. Table laughed. My mother laughed. Even people who didn't know me laughed because Rick Upton has that gift. He can gut you in public and make it sound like affection. I sat there with an autopilot smile on my face. The one I'd been practicing since I was 9. Nathan didn't smile. He just held my hand under the table, his grip tight and steady. Across the table, Patricia Marsh tilted her head. She leaned toward my mother and whispered, Richard's being a bit hard on her tonight, isn't he? My mother's answer came instantly. Oh, that's just how he shows love. Patricia looked at me, and our eyes met for half a second. I saw the recognition in her eyes. The quiet alarm of a woman who knows exactly what she's watching. 8:15 p.m. Dessert was cleared. The string quartet stopped. My father stood up. He buttoned his jacket and tapped his spoon against his champagne glass. Clink, clink, clink. The room went quiet. "I want to raise a glass to my daughter, Danielle," he started. I straightened my back. My heart did something stupid. It hoped. Even after Project Atlas, even after 29 years of evidence, a tiny part of me thought maybe this is the moment. Maybe he'll finally say he's proud. "For 29 years," he said, scanning the room, "I've watched this girl struggle. With school, with work, with every relationship that didn't quite work out." The heat rushed to my face. 60 pairs of eyes shifted toward me. "I'll be honest," he continued. "There were times I wasn't sure anyone would stick around long enough to figure her out." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the room. Glasses were held mid-air. Then he raised his flute, grinned that big, predatory Richard Upton grin, and delivered the line he'd been sharpening all week. "So tonight, I want to toast to Danielle, who finally found a man desperate enough." He laughed. A big, generous, self-satisfied laugh. But this time, no one joined him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was deafening. 60 people frozen. A woman at table 4 literally covered her mouth. Gerald Marsh stared at his plate. Nathan's whole body tensed. I felt his chair shift. He was ready to end it. I put my hand on his arm. "Don't," I whispered. "I've got this." My father stood there, glass raised, waiting for the applause. He saw the temperature drop, but he wasn't the type to back down. He doubled down. "Oh, come on," he said, grinning wider. "It's a joke. Danielle knows I love her." "Right, sweetheart?" He looked at me. 60 people looked at me. 5 seconds passed. 5 seconds is a long time when no one is breathing. Then I said it. Quiet. Clear. "Sit down, Dad." His grin faltered. "Danielle, don't be dramatic." I said, "Sit down." My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. The room was so quiet a whisper would have hit the back wall. My father searched the room for an ally, a laugh, anything. He found nothing. Just 60 witnesses. He sat down. It was the first time in my life he'd ever done what I told him to do. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and smoothed the front of my cream silk dress. I walked, calm, steady, no rush, to the front of the room. I had a laptop in my bag. And I had a file called Project Atlas. As I walked toward that projector screen, I could feel the shift in the air. The charity case was gone. The C student was gone. The forensic accountant had entered the room. And she was about to balance the books. I hadn't needed that laptop then, but I sure as hell needed it now. I unzipped the bag and my hands were steady. My heart? Not so much. It was slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. My father's voice came from behind me, sharp like a whip cracking. "Danielle, what are you doing?" "Sit back down." I didn't even turn around. I grabbed the HDMI cable and plugged it into the projector port. This was the same projector Big Rick had set up for his greatest hits family slideshow. Photos of vacations he'd curated, holidays he'd staged, a highlight reel of a happy family that simply didn't exist. The screen flickered to life, glowing blue against the brick wall. I clicked into the folder. Project Atlas. Then I turned to face the room. 60 people. My mother was gripping her napkins so hard her knuckles were blue. Nathan was standing 3 steps behind me, a silent wall of support. Gerald Marsh was still at table 1, his reading glasses perched on his nose, looking confused. "My father just told 60 people that no man would willingly marry me," I said. My voice was even. Professional. It was the same tone I used when I was presenting $1 million fraud finding to a board of directors. I think it's only fair that these same 60 people know who my father really is when the cameras aren't rolling. I double-clicked the file. The first page filled the screen, a clean white background with bold black text. The header read, Forensic Audit Summary, Unauthorized Fund Transfers, Upton and Marsh Construction. I saw Gerald Marsh's champagne glass begin to tilt in his hand. I'm not here to give a speech. I don't need to, I told the room. This is a forensic audit report I've compiled over the last 3 months. It documents a systematic pattern of unauthorized fund transfers from the company my father co-owns with Mr. Gerald Marsh. I scrolled to the summary page. It was beautiful in its simplicity. 3 columns: dates, amounts, destination accounts. It was a decade of betrayal laid out in the clinical cold format I'd been trained to produce. The numbers didn't have feelings. They didn't make jokes. They just told the truth. My father shot to his feet. His chair scraped the marble floor with a screech that made half the room flinch. "This is ridiculous," he barked. His voice was loud now, the big rick boom cracking open to show the monster underneath. "You don't know what you're talking about, Danielle. You're out of your league." I looked him dead in the eye. For the first time in 29 years, I didn't blink. I didn't look away. "Dad, I'm a certified fraud examiner. This is literally what I do for a living. I'm exactly in my league. You're just finally playing by the rules." The room didn't gasp. It was worse. Just absorbed. 60 people processing the reality that the king of the county was a common thief. I could see the realization moving across the tables like a storm front. Widened eyes. Hands reaching for phones. Couples whispering behind their hands. Then came the sound. Smash. Gerald Marsh's champagne flute slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Patricia grabbed her husband's arm. "Gerald?" Gerald didn't look at her. He was staring at the screen. His face had gone a sickly shade of gray, the kind of gray that comes when you realize your life's work has been a lie. He looked at my father, and I'll never forget that expression. It wasn't anger yet. It was the look of a man discovering his house has been on fire for years and the person he trusted most was the one holding the match. My father moved fast. He tried to do the peacemaker pose, palms up, shoulders relaxed. "Gerald, buddy, listen to me. She's lying. She's just pissed off because I made a joke. She's trying to humiliate me." Gerald raised one hand. He didn't shout. He didn't even stand up yet. He just put his palm out. "Don't," Gerald said. One word. But his voice shook with a tremor that carried more weight than anything my father had said all night. Gerald reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number right there at table 1. "Ray? It's Gerald. I need you in the office Monday morning. 8 a.m. sharp. It's about the partnership. Bring the litigation team." He hung up, set the phone on the table, and he never looked at my father again. Richard spun toward my mother. He was drowning and he was looking for a life raft. "Linda, tell them. Tell them she's lost her mind. Tell them she's unstable." My mother sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded on the table. Her eyes were fixed on her plate. She said nothing. For 29 years, she had given my father her silence as a shield. Tonight, she gave it to him as a weapon. Her silence wasn't protection anymore, it was permission. Chairs began to scrape. The guests at the far tables didn't wait for the cake. They stood up quietly, grabbing coats and purses. There were no dramatic exits, just the slow, unmistakable withdrawal of people who realized they were standing in a crime scene. Nathan stepped up beside me. He didn't say a word, just placed his hand gently between my shoulder blades. His warmth was the only thing keeping me upright. Then a voice came from table 2. Helen Cole, Nathan's mother, stood up. She walked over to me, took both of my hands in hers, and looked me in the eyes. "I am so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart," she said. 4 words. The exact 4 words I'd been starving for my entire life. They came from a stranger, and somehow that made them mean everything. Gerald stood up slowly, steadying himself on the table. He walked over to my father. They stood face to face. 15 years of friendship versus 15 years of theft. 15 years, Rich, Gerald said, his voice quiet and controlled. I trusted you with my kids' college funds. I trusted you with my legacy. Gerald, let me explain, my father started, his words tripping over each other. There's context. The transfers were a restructuring strategy. My accountant said. Gerald almost laughed. Your daughter is a forensic accountant, Richard, and she just showed me exactly what your strategy was. Gerald adjusted his tie, turned to Patricia, and they walked out. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't look back. And as they left, the rest of the room followed. By 9 p.m., the Whitfield was a ghost town. The string quartet had bailed. The waiters were clearing plates from a dinner no one finished. My mother was still sitting at table 1, a statue in a silk dress. My father was at the bar, his jacket off, holding a whiskey he hadn't touched. I closed my laptop and slid it into my bag. The adrenaline was fading, and a heavy, cold grief was settling in its place. I walked to the center of the room. My father looked at me, his eyes bloodshot with rage. You just destroyed your own father, he hissed. No, Dad, I said. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped being the one to hide the debris. Over a joke? You did this over a joke? This was never about the toast, I said. And you know it. He turned to my mother. Linda, you're gonna let her do this? My mother finally looked up. You did this, Richard. Not her. 7 words. They landed like a door slamming shut. My father's face did something I'd never seen. It crumbled. Not into tears, he was too proud for that, but into a total blankness. The look of a man who had finally run out of people to blame. I grabbed my bag. Nathan was by the door with my coat. Goodbye, Dad, I said. He didn't answer. I walked out into the sharp November air and took the first real breath of my adult life. I'd been underwater for 29 years, and I had finally broken the surface. Monday morning was a bloodbath. Gerald's attorney was at the Upton and Marsh office before the coffee was even brewed. They had a court order for a full audit by an independent firm. I stayed out of it. I had to. My report was the spark, but the fire had to be handled by third parties to keep it legal. By Tuesday, the Upton scandal was the only thing people were talking about at the grocery store. My father was removed from the Ridgewood Country Club. Not suspended. Removed. 22 years of dues and charity work wiped out in a single board vote. By Wednesday, his phone stopped ringing. The business contacts who had laughed at his jokes on Saturday were suddenly unavailable for lunch. It was a slow, deliberate erasure. My father called me 11 times that week. I didn't pick up once. The 12th call went to voicemail. Danielle, you need to fix this. Call me back now. Till giving orders. Till trying to boss the person who held the keys to his prison cell. I deleted it. For the first time, the silence belonged to me. The independent audit took 6 weeks. The final total? $837,000. Siphoned through shell companies over a decade. It funded the lake house, the boat, the country club life, all of it stolen from Gerald. Gerald filed a civil suit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. My father's assets were frozen. He burned through his savings hiring a high-priced defense team, but you can't argue with math. By March, the company was suspended. The lake house went on the market. Nathan showed me the listing one night. I looked at the photos of the deck where my father used to hold court, telling everyone how he'd built his empire from nothing. You okay? Nathan asked. I didn't do this to him, I whispered. He did this to himself. I know, Nathan said. But justice doesn't always feel like a party. Sometimes it just feels like the weight of a door finally closing. The heaviest moment, though, came 2 weeks later. My mother called me on a Sunday. Danielle, she said. Her voice sounded different. Lighter. I should have said something 30 years ago. I am so sorry. I leaned against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. The words I'd waited a lifetime for, wrapped in 3 decades of regret. I saw what he did to you, she whispered. And I told myself it was just his way. Because admitting the truth that I let my daughter be hurt was too much to carry. But watching you at that party, I've never seen anything so brave. It broke something open in me. Mom, I said, my throat tight. I love you. But love isn't enough anymore. I need you to show me you're different. I started therapy, she said. Last Tuesday was my first session. I pressed my hand to my mouth and finally let a tear fall. That's a good start, Mom. That's a really good start. The last thing I ever heard from my father was a text message. You chose a stranger over your own blood. It was the final confirmation I needed. Gerald Marsh, his partner of 15 years, was a stranger the second he couldn't be controlled. My father didn't know what love was. He only knew ownership. 6 months later, Nathan and I had our own celebration. It wasn't at a marble venue with valet parking. It was in Nathan's parents' backyard. We had string lights, burgers on a grill, and a playlist we'd made together. No seating charts. No projectors. Just 15 people who actually liked us. My friends from work were there, drinking beer out of cans. Nathan's mom made lemon bars. My mother was there too, quiet but present. Trying. Halfway through the night, a delivery arrived. A massive arrangement of white peonies. The card read, "To Danielle, the most honest person I've ever known. Congratulations. Gerald and Patricia Marsh." I stood in the doorway and cried. Real, messy, ugly tears. Not because I was sad, but because the cage was finally open. People ask me if I regret it. The answer is complicated. I regret that my father was the kind of man who forced me to choose between my integrity and my blood. That's a choice no child should ever have to make. But I've learned something important. Silence isn't loyalty. Silence is just a slow-acting poison. I stopped swallowing the poison. I chose myself. If you're sitting at a table right now, shrinking yourself so someone else can feel big, stop. Setting a boundary doesn't mean you don't love your family. It means you love yourself enough to survive them. Nathan and I are getting married next month. It'll be small. It'll be quiet. And for the first time in my life, I won't be looking over my shoulder to see if I'm performing well enough for the man at the head of the table. I'm Danielle Upton. I balance the books for a living. And finally, for the first time in 29 years, my own life is in the black. If Danielle's story spoke to you, don't just scroll past. Have you ever had to choose the truth over your own family? Drop a comment below. Even if it's just 2 words, I choose me. Hit subscribe to join our community.